Building your own app as someone who can't really code is more doable than ever before. Yes, there are a lot of coders that will tell you that these no-code tools are not that great and that you cannot build anything meaningful with them. I'm here to tell you that they are wrong. You can do a lot in these no-code tools, and these tools keep getting better and better. I did the same video last year, and these tools have improved greatly. Heck, even last year, I didn't mention AI once. I wasn't even thinking about it with these tools. I've also seen way more people building meaningful apps with these tools in the past year. The proof is there that you can build meaningful apps without knowing how to code. In this year's video, I explored some more tools that I've heard more and more about and feel like I nerded out way more than last year because I had to. There's so much more to these no-code app builders this year. Now, I'm going to be solely focused on no-code mobile app builders that can extend a desktop. However, their primary function is mobile. If you're looking to build an app that's desktop focused, some of these tools in this video might apply, but I'd also look at WeWeb, Bubble, and Softer. They are desktop focused and pretty wonderful. There are links in the description to those tools. Let's jump into the first mobile no-code app builder. The first mobile no-code app builder I want to talk about is Glide. Now, I don't want to talk a ton about Glide because I actually think they're shifting away from mobile apps. They've been actually, as you can kind of tell, even just on their website now, really focusing on business software, so internal software, and actually I think looking, as you can see here, more of a desktop feel. Now, one of the things they are, one that's actually you can see like mobile and then the web and everything else. And these apps for Glide are actually ones that they cannot go to the app store. So these are web apps, as you'll hear from people. So they're not going to be, you're not going to download the code and then put it into the app store. These will be solely focused, they'll be solely on the web. So essentially they're kind of like a really nicer website in a lot of ways with a little more functionality. Now, it's not all necessarily a bad thing. The nice thing about Glide is that this is actually, I think, the easiest of all the tools if you want to build like a very simple mobile app. And especially if maybe you're in a business right now, you're trying to create your own software, and maybe the problem you're solving, or actually the solution that you have currently, is all built in maybe an Airtable or Google Sheets. Glide's a really wonderful option because you can think of Airtable or a Google Sheets as your backend, and then Glide as your front end to it all. So if I go into the app builder of Glide, you can see this is relatively simple and it's really easy, I think, to understand. So your navigation is here, so the navigation in here, pairing along here. And then what Glide has been, I think, really doing really nicely is actually building like these sample screens and making it really easy to do. So that way it's more template based. Now, with that, right, that means you can't customize a ton. And for some people, that's really wonderful, especially for maybe internal tools where like, hey, we're not building anything that's, we're not reinventing the wheel. You're just kind of you're doing your own custom version of things because that makes sense, but also it's not like super duper custom. That's where Glide's really great. If I was building a startup and maybe it was like a simpler idea, maybe it's like a task app or whatever it might be, I might start with Glide just to kind of get like a feel for it. But at the same time, you might not even really get that feel for it at this point because they're really focused on internal business tools. So I think Glide's really wonderful. I think it's easy to understand. I think it's one of the easiest tools to get started with. This is something I think you could spend just maybe a few hours and like get it and go, especially if your data is really organized in a Google Sheet or an Airtable base. Glide's a really powerful tool. But again, I think they're focusing more on the desktop of things rather than the mobile. You can see it starts here in mobile, but then if you go click here, it's a web version. Not very good showing of it, but that's where I think, it's customizable for mobile and web. But I also think these apps are being more focused for desktop, which is not necessarily a bad thing and just not the fit for this video. The second mobile no-code app builder I want to talk about is Adalo. Now, Adalo, I feel like, is the Squarespace of this space, of the mobile no-code app builder. So if you're someone that maybe likes the Squarespace where it's kind of template-based, but also like customizable enough, Adalo is a really great option. Now, Adalo's been really getting into this mobile space, I think, even heavily. Like, you can see even mobile app. I think last year they kind of were doing this like mobile or desktop. We can do a little bit of everything. And as you can see, you can do mobile devices and the web. So you can do both of them, but they are focusing on mobile, which is awesome. Now, one of the things that is new this year comparatively to last year is that you can actually now go into the app stores and submit your apps from the Adalo into, the Apple App Store and Google Play Store, which is fantastic. So this is one that if you want to, maybe you're building a more internal business tool, if you want to, maybe it's more robustness than a Glide, I think Adalo is really wonderful. If you're also building a startup that isn't the most complex thing in the world, Adalo might be the place to start. Now, one of the things with Adalo, though, is that you cannot export the code. So if that is something that you want to do later on, you currently cannot do that with Adalo, and it doesn't look like you can do that a ton, or like it doesn't even look like it's on the roadmap. I could be wrong about that, but it doesn't look like that's even going to be coming for exporting code. And for some others, that might be important, but it might not be that important at all. So it's really up to you and how you want to approach that. For me, if I was building a really simpler tool, but it's a little more robust than Glide, I don't think that wouldn't bother me that much for exporting the code. Now, to get a feel of what Adalo is like, here's kind of a basic app. As you can see here, this is one of their template apps. Now, I really like how Adalo is formatted. This is like from a designer standpoint, right? If you're used to, the storyboarding and things like that, this is Adalo, right? You can see all the different screens for the app. You can see the signups and like how it all flows. You can see the arrows and what button goes to what. Personally, that makes the most sense to me. Like this is why I like Adalo's kind of formatting really nicely. I think the way you can design and actionable items here in Adalo is one of the easiest ways comparatively to tools, especially we'll talk about in a bit. But again, it is slightly limited, but it's not as limited as Glide, I would say. Now, one of the cool parts about Adalo, though, too, is you can connect it to other databases. So if you want to connect it to, right, Airtable, Google Sheets, or really any other things, I know Xano is one of them that more and more tools are getting connected with. You can do all of that within Adalo as well. So let's say, again, like if you have a really pretty Google Sheets or an Airtable base that's really organized well, but you want to kind of take it to the next level in terms of formatting and things like that, Adalo is a great option to plug into that as well. So I would look into this. So I kind of see this as we are basic, but like not that basic of an app. And maybe you're taking like, hey, I want to build an MVP, but Glide can't just do that just yet. I think Adalo is it's a really great starting point if you've never built an app before. You still need to understand a little bit of like front end concept, things like that. But if you have like a designer background, I actually think Adalo is actually pretty simple to pick up. And they have plugins and all these different things and publishing the app stores now, which is pretty sweet. You also can see the analytics. So there's a lot of reasons why Adalo is really great. You can see there's like these, standardizing your branding, things like that too. I think Adalo is really wonderful. I think they keep getting better and better. But is it the most robust of all the tools? No. But if I was building an MVP that's like not that complicated like this one, right? I think this is like a first class, like if you're teaching classes, if you're building something like that, I think Adalo is a really wonderful tool, especially if you look through their templates. Then you can actually see like, is there a template that you can just adjust and then have your own app. Now, Adalo does have more and more templates come into it, but one of the other things that they're really starting to build out, I feel like, is their app academy. And there's now over 70 of these courses here within Adalo, which is pretty sweet. And I believe they're all free. So if you go into here, you can see like building an Instagram course or like an app publishing, like all the different details for all of them. I think that's really helpful. So if you've never built an app, I think Adalo is probably the first one I would maybe start with to play around with and just get an MVP going, those kind of things. If you're not sure, if you're like, hey, I want this like skill in my toolkit in terms of like building apps for, out of no code tools, I think I'd probably start with Adalo because I think it's the easiest to pick up and like to get an MVP off the ground. If you're like, hey, I want to build apps for like, as a freelancer, I want to really build a super robust thing and potentially like export it into code and start coding at some point or hire someone to code it at some point, I would not start with Adalo for that. But if it's just a very simple MVP and you want to just want to kind of like, stick your toe in the water a little bit with these no code apps, I think Adalo is a really great starting point. The third mobile no-code app builder I want to talk about is Draftbit. Now, Draftbit is one that is newer to me personally, but is a tool that I think I'm getting more and more excited about. And that's for two main reasons. One is that I think this is the tool that is the most similar to Webflow. Now, I'm someone who's actually been building my personal websites through Webflow, and I think that system makes relative sense to me. And I think Draftbit actually has a lot of the similar dynamics. Now, I don't think it's as polished as Webflow is in terms of like the usability and the user experience, but I think they're on their way. The second reason why I'm really excited about Draftbit is actually they're building these mobile apps, and the code behind it is React Native, and that they're coding it as you're designing. And actually, you can preview things, I think, relatively quicker than you can in the different apps that we're talking about in this video. So here we are on their website, and the onboarding process, I think, for Draftbit is actually like, I think, the best of all of them. Now, that onboarding process isn't shown here as you're like clicking through and things like that, but you can see they do have templates. I think this has been building up as we go. Now, one of the cool parts that I think is really, really cool that they're doing and that's not showing on this homepage is that if you hit get started and sign up and all that stuff, they actually have a video of their founder actually going through all of the tool and actually showing you like the very basics. And that video was incredibly helpful. And then right below that, they actually had a Calendly link so you can actually sign up to meet with their team and then them to answer any questions or just walk through the platform with you. That to me is a super awesome feature especially if you want to like, hey, I want to be an expert in Draftbit or understand how to build apps in this tool, or even just like understand how to build these mobile no code apps in general. If you really want to learn something, I think you should do it with people. And I think their ability to, hey, just like you can sign up for time to meet with people, even if you haven't paid for anything yet, that's pretty sweet. Will they keep that as things go? I don't know. I doubt they will. But I think in this current stage where Draftbit is, I think that's a really awesome thing to really get into. And if you're someone that actually wants to maybe potentially export your app, so maybe you're going to build your MVP with Draftbit and then export it as maybe you've gotten traction and things like that. If you're doing this as a startup, this is a really good option, especially that it's building in React Native. Now you'll hear different things about like how clean the code is, all those kind of things. I'm not the best expert for that, but at least it gives you the code for the most part with that. I also heard that you only get some components, but I also don't think that's true anymore, just based on how, just even looking into the tool. So if I go into the tool actually here, you can see, right, this has like, if you've used Webflow, this has a lot of similar dynamics, and this has like, you can align things, justify things. I wish more tools would kind of have this style of things. And you can see the breakpoints, so you can see like how things break in here. Now my screen's too small here to kind of show the differences, but then you can kind of build with those different breakpoints in mind. Now they even have a big screen, which is pretty sweet. Webflow doesn't even have that. So that's pretty cool. Now this builder though I think it's really good, but I think it's pretty limited. It's not the most polished thing I've ever seen in my life. Like for example, you can't drag and drop these things like you would in things. You have to kind of build within these components and these different pages and things like that. So you're building a lot in here and then kind of going from here to here. And so it's a lot of like, so obviously you can see things, but it's not like, I think building's a little bit slower than it could be. So hopefully, I'm guessing drag and drop is on their way. I'm guessing that's a bigger thing. So you can even see like the different phones and stuff. It's cool. So I think it's really powerful, and it's coding and things like that as you go. And then if you go into here, you can export the code here. Now I don't have a paid plan, so I can't export it, but in theory, if I was paying for all of it, right, I could pay for it. I can add even my own custom code, all those kind of things. If I was paying for this service right now, but I'm not building an app necessarily in Draftbit right now. Now, Draftbit, I think, is for those that maybe have built maybe more powerful websites like in Webflow or Ghost or things like that. If you've never even built a website, I don't think I'd recommend it out of the gate. I would probably start with maybe Adalo or a Glide to start out, and then kind of move up, or even just build your own website first and then build an app like this. Draftbit's got a lot of complexity to it, but do I think it's like the most like hardest thing to go learn? No, I think they're doing a really nice job, and their content and things like that are getting better and better as we go too. They are publishing more and more on YouTube, where you're probably watching this video. So if you're looking to kind of even get a touch of what they're, maybe what they're looking for, the tutorials are like, go onto their YouTube page and you can kind of see like how you can learn things as you go. This is I think a relatively still early tool in all of it. So this is, I think, going to develop fast. And I think also hopefully the community then grows with it. From what I can tell, the community is still pretty early in developing for this one, but those that are in this community, I think are really passionate about it from what I can read. So that's awesome in terms of having just people to bounce ideas off or just kind of help you build as you're building your own app in Draftbit, is that if that's what you decide. The fourth mobile no code app builder I want to talk about is Flutterflow. Flutterflow is the most robust of all of these tools we're going to talk about in this video. It is got a lot of bells and whistles, and you can do almost anything, I think, at this point with Flutterflow. I'm sure there's limitations, but there's very few from what I can tell. Flutterflow is the most robust of them, and I think the most polished. But with that, right, I think it has the steepest of the learning curves. If you're okay with the steep learning curve, or you're like, hey, I want to really learn how to build these apps in Flutterflow because maybe you want to build multiple apps or freelancer, or you really just want that skill in your toolkit, awesome. I think it's a really powerful tool. You can do custom code. They have an AI tool that it didn't work well for me, but that doesn't mean it's not great or can't work well. I think it's a really powerful tool. Now, even with the screenshot, right, it kind of looks similar to Draftbit, and I think Draftbit and Flutterflow have a lot of similarities. The one big difference is the polishedness, I would say, but also in the coding languages that they're using. So Draftbit is using React Native, which is what a lot of the apps you're using today are using, even just with the backend of code. But then Flutterflow is using a language called Flutter. Shocker. They're using that, which is a Google-based language, and that you'll hear different mixed things of whether or not like how reliable that code will be in the future. I think it'll be okay, but I think that's something just to know, maybe like the slight differences between React Native and Flutter. I don't think if you're just building an MVP, like I don't think that's like a make or break thing. I think actually like the polishedness and like, do you actually like using the tool is the bigger thing at this point. But in terms of longevity, like, is that something to be thinking about? For sure. In terms of like, even just for exporting the code at some point, maybe you want to build your MVP and then export the code at some point. I'd be like making sure you like, if you're going to hand it off, especially to someone, or maybe you yourself, like, you know, want to code up at some point, like understand the different languages that they're both using. So Draftbit is using React Native, and then Flutterflow is using Flutter. The other big difference between Flutterflow and Draftbit, I would say, is just like the robustness and also just the community and the resources that they have. Draftbit doesn't have the same size community, and I don't think the same resources that Flutterflow has. Flutterflow's community has really grown this past year in terms of like people you can just even like message and just find, you know, go on Reddit threads, all those kind of different things. That you'll find Flutterflow people, I think, way more often than you will find Draftbit people. That's not necessarily a bad thing or good or bad thing. It just, if you're looking to be in a community with people building apps, you'll have a better shot with building with people in Flutterflow. Now, let's go into the tool itself. So if I go into Flutterflow here, you can see here's kind of the basic tool. Like, again, it looks similar to like a Webflow and Draftbit, but like this part of it is a little bit different to it. In terms of, you know, creating variables, you can see the different, you know, responsiveness or layouts, things like that. So that has some similarities. Here's the big difference though between Draftbit and Flutterflow is, right, you can, you know, drag and drop things. You need to understand how to structure things within the screens here in Flutterflow, but once you get that, I think the drag and drop makes way more sense. The other thing with Flutterflow to be thinking about is the databases. So if I go into this databases here, you can see this is connected to Firebase. Now you can use Firebase, which is the Google databases, but you also can use Supabase, which is another database tool that's not Google related. That's a different video for which one to use and things like that. But the databases are actually, I think, more important than people realize, because this is what's storing your data. So you can think of Firebase, things like that, as your backend, or like your Airtable, Google Sheets equivalents, kind of in a way. They're acting as your backend, and then, right, Flutterflow, your Draftbits are on the top. Now, those add extra cost as you go as well. So make sure you understand like what those are storing and like what the cost will be as you go. They're mostly free to get started to build your MVP. It takes a while before you actually start having to pay for things, but it's something to keep in mind as you're building. Now, Flutterflow has really gotten really cool in like API calls and just like connecting to different things and their apps and schemas, and like this keeps getting more and more robust. Their design tool has actually gotten really cool. So if you go into design and theme settings, it's similar to how Webflow has like their variables and things like that. This has actually gotten really similar, which is pretty sweet. Their design systems and widgets, and there's a lot in like, text and things like that, which is awesome. So that helps standardize things, especially if you're starting to work with a team. I will say, I think if you're building with a team of people, maybe even just like 2 of you, I think actually the collaborativeness here in Flutterflow is probably the best of all of them. It's not to say you can't build an app with someone in the other tools. You definitely can, but I think you can even like comment and things like that in here in Flutterflow, which I don't think is the same in the other tools. So again, I think that in terms of robustness and what you can do with it, I think Flutterflow is the best in terms of that, but it has the steepest learning curve, but it also has a lot of the resources and that comes with it. If you were to kind of batch the tools that we've talked about, I would put Adalo and Glide kind of in one kind of bucket, and then I would put Draftbit and Flutterflow in the other bucket. So we've kind of gone from, in terms of like advancedness and what robustness, we've gone from Glide, which I think is the simplest, to Adalo, which is I think a step up from that, and then Draftbit and Flutterflow are kind of like the most robustness in terms of what you want to do. And you can export the code with both Flutterflow and Draftbit. So if you want to add custom code or even just export the app and then start coding, you can do that in these tools. And that really shows even just like with how robust you can build these apps. The last mobile no code app builder I want to talk about is one that is not even out yet, and that is Bubble. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of this video that Bubble is a really great app builder for desktop apps, and they are currently in beta with a builder for native mobile apps. Now, if you like the idea of Bubble, or maybe you build desktop apps with Bubble, I think this is going to be a really great option. Now, there's a few different things to be keeping in mind with Bubble currently, just that probably will carry over into their mobile apps. So I think you'll be able to put them into the App Store, which is pretty exciting, right from Bubble, which is kind of like similar with Adalo and Flutterflow and Draftbit. But one of the limitations with Bubble currently is that you can't export the code from Bubble. So if you're looking again to maybe export that code, Bubble's not gonna be able to do that. But I will say that Bubble is actually, I think, one of the most robust of the app builders in general. So I think that mobile is going to be really robust as well, especially now that they're giving it time to be in beta and things like that. I also think that their university of maybe resources and just learning Bubble are actually one of the best. Partly because they've actually built with Gregory John, who's someone that I've worked with a little bit. You can see Gregory here in this YouTube video. And Gregory, from what I can tell, is on their YouTube channel, has built out just like almost hundreds of videos at this point on their YouTube page that are completely free. So if you want to learn Bubble, I actually think this is the best resource in terms of learning tools. In terms of especially these app builders in general, from desktop or mobile. Gregory is one of the best teachers for these tools, and I think it's awesome that they've partnered with him to do like a whole university, kind of similar to how Webflow has it. Gregory is a really wonderful teacher, so you can go right here to their Bubble YouTube page and learn a ton about what they're doing. Now, we'll have to see what this all looks like in terms of what building a mobile app on Bubble will be like. But if this is something maybe you want to start with desktop and maybe you can transition it to mobile, that is something to keep in mind as well. If you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more resources for building a bootstrap startup, check out the newsletter down in the description below.